this is Ken Folan, your host of Windham Weekly with my co-host, Marc Doyle, but, he's in the corner over there like a good boy. And you're listening again to Windham Weekly on WILI 1400 and FM 95.3. We are excited to have you back. We are excited about our guest who's going to talk to us for the next hour about life. And you all know him. He's our retired fire chief of Windham here. Willimantic, sorry. Sorry, God, all you Windham people and Willimantic people. I always thought it was one town. But anyway.
Don't be stepping on those volunteers.
I won't step on the volunteers' toes. But we welcome Chief Marc Scrivener to the show. And we're going to let him talk about whatever he feels like, because he's retired, and that's what you do when you're retired. So welcome, Marc.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Marc, I'll let you say.
Well, we certainly appreciate you being here.
All right. Thank you for having me. How's that? Is that better?
That's good. That's good. So let's start at the beginning. When you were 4, did you always want to be a fireman?
I don't think my 85-year-old mother remembers this conversation anymore, but she does say that when I was very young, she drove me by the Willimantic Fire Station, and I declared that I would work there one day.
Really?
But I don't think I really got the bug until I was maybe 18 years old and walked into the firehouse in Hebron where I lived at the time, and immediately was bitten by the bug.
I don't think I realized that you were a hometown boy. I thought you came to us later on in life. So you grew up in the area?
Oh, well, I grew up in Hebron, and Hebron was just cow pastures, so if you needed something, you came to Willimantic, right?
Of course.
And I guess if you really went on a big adventure, you went to Manchester. But I came here to the comic book store and the movies, and we had friendlies, of course. And,
of course.
Yeah. So
Thursday nights, you're here for the big shopping nights, right?
I don't have a lot of recollection of that, but presumably yes. And so, 18 years old, I walked into the volunteer firehouse in Hebron, and initially, like the smell of the firehouse, of the soot and the old rubber coats and the bright shiny things, all of that just grabbed me right off the bat.
Those of us in the profession call it turnout gear.
Turnout gear, that's right. Yeah.
I wish Marc would turn outside the radio station.
So you started as a volunteer in Hebron.
I joined up right away at 18. My parents didn't let me get a driver's license until I was 18, so that was the earliest I could join. And a lot of my peers in school were doing it, and they were around town causing havoc, I guess. And so it looked cool to me, and so I joined up at 18 right out of high school, and I had also had this desire to serve in the military. So I went over to Manchester and met an Air Force recruiter who also happened to be an Air Force firefighter.
Okay.
And my worlds just came together at that point.
Oh.
So I think I was 19 when I joined the Air Force and went off to see the world.
So where were you stationed in the Air Force?
Well, everybody goes through Lackland, of course, in basic training in San Antonio, Texas, and then they sent me off to corn country in Illinois, Chanute Air Force Base, which is long gone, Champaign, Illinois, for fire school.
Yep.
And then they my first full assignment was in England, believe it or not, for 2 years in England. Really great story about that. Now, do you know any Scriveners?
No.
Other than me?
No.
I didn't know any other than my immediate family growing up. I still don't know any other than my immediate family. But when I got to England and opened the phone book, I was amazed at how many Scriveners. Apparently, my family was the only one that came over here. They all stayed.
Everyone stayed there.
They're like Smith over there.
Yeah, okay.
And so the area that I was stationed in over there was very close to where my ancestors had come from. I didn't know that at the time. And so it was kind of cool to reconnect to my ancestral home over there, and England was a great assignment, and it's not terribly unlike this part of the country either. It's not unlike Connecticut, so it felt very comfortable over there.
I'm still looking for my trip to England. So my mother came over after World War II, and it wasn't a war bride, she always maintained, but she did marry a U.S. soldier, but we were Walfords, so it's otherwise known, I guess, as Dark Vikings. It's an interesting. So I'm looking forward to going back there and doing some also research in the background.
Both sides of my family are very English. My maternal grandparents were Potters, like Harry Potter. So I couldn't be more English.
Well, I got split. My mother, as I said, was born and raised in England, but my father was American Irish. So I get that split there. But it's.
If you look at my 23andMe, there's Irish in there. So clearly there was some hanky-panky back in the day. But
well, some of those maids, I guess, or something. So how long did you serve in the force?
Well, I was 2 years in England, and then I spent another year and a half after that at Austin, Texas. The base is no longer there at Bergstrom Air Base.
You closed a lot of bases.
I
in your
did,
career.
yeah. Well, Clinton was closing them down pretty fast, but Austin, Texas was a great assignment, and I have a ancestral connection to Austin as well. And then Dayton, Ohio for a short bit, and I separated so I joined in 99. I separated from active duty in 94. And did a few years in the reserves in the late 90s as well.
Well, Dayton would have been the downside of all of your trips between England and Austin.
The local area was not, anything that, excited me, but the base was very cool. There was 5 firehouses on base. It was a big, big base. Air Force Museum. So Wright-Patterson Air Base was a very exciting fire department assignment, just because of the size of the bases and the amount of firefighters that were
So I imagine you were around not just the jets, but not just the smaller planes, but the bombers as well, the big boys.
In England, we had A-10s, which are the Warthogs, and C-130s, and we had some pararescue helicopters. In Austin, Texas, we had F-4s, RF-4s that were left over from Vietnam that had been repurposed for reconnaissance. And they were still flying missions over the Texas-Mexico border looking for drug runners, manually with the old aircraft at the time. They'd come back. There was 24-hour operation. Yeah. They'd come back and pull the film out of the aircraft and process it and look to see what they could see for drug runners. Okay. It was very exciting because it was a 24-hour operation. We were on the go constantly at Austin. And we had what was called hot pits. They would bring an aircraft in, they'd fuel it up with the pilot in it, and we'd stand by with a fire truck, and they'd send them right back out. It was really hopping.
Because that's a dangerous operation, refueling them with the fumes.
Yeah, for sure.
So you did a lot of foam work, I take it.
Thankfully, I didn't have a whole lot of need to use foam for real, but certainly we were swimming in it for training. So I'm probably, my PFAS levels are probably through the roof, but PFAS is also in everything. So we're all probably deeply contaminated.
So then you retired, you said, or came out, and then did you come back home and?
So I came back to, there was family reasons why to come back to leave the Air Force. And it was easy to leave. I had re-enlisted, believe it or not, but they were downsizing the military, and it was really easy to get a discharge, honorable discharge, pretty much just for the asking. And I transferred my obligation over to the reserves, and I came back to Hebron. And Hebron at the time had 2 full-time paid firefighters, and I came back in January. By October, I was working at the firehouse in Hebron, and I stayed there for 5 years. And then my heart was looking for something more challenging. I was looking for a bigger opportunity, and Willimantic, still called out to me. So I applied here, and I also had applied to the Yukon Fire Department at the time, but I really wanted to be here in Willimantic. So thankfully, Chief Walsh hired me, and the rest.
Chief Walsh, I remember Chief Walsh very well. Yes.
I just saw him recently.
Right. He still lives in town?
He's
across the bridge.
I think he's in Wethersfield or something. I don't know.
Okay.
He's out that way somewhere, Newington. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he moved with his family.
Yeah.
Why don't you walk us through? So then you came to Willimantic, right?
Yeah.
After 5 years in Hebron.
1999, I came here. So February 99.
Quickly walk us through your career, from where you started, some memorable experiences that brought you to become the chief.
Well, it's an interesting story. I mean, so when I got here, most of the captains had been here for 35 years. They really long in the tooth. Love them, Captain Bolio and Nick Lucas. I served under, and there was when I don't know if you can remember.
St. Lucia was.
He had retired already.
Oh, he retired. Okay.
I don't know if you remember an attorney from Hebron who had been fire chief in Hebron years ago, Bill Boris, but he had said to me one time, "You'll never promote."
I know. I actually, tell you the truth, I sold cars to Bill's wife when I was working at Wild Motors.
Yeah. Well, he had said to me one time, "You'll never promote in Willimantic," and I just fell into it at the right time. All those guys that were long in the tooth had retired, and it's a strange scenario. I had taken on the extra duties of training in the firehouse, and we had a culture of always put your name in for every opening. And I'm a firefighter, but there was the next rank would be captain at that time. We have lieutenants now, and then deputy chief and chief. And the deputy chief job opened up because Walsh had retired, Palmer Senior had promoted, and there was an opening for a deputy. And, I had been going to college. I had been teaching at the fire academy. I had been on the urban search and rescue team at Brainerd Field. It all were, fire service stuff. And I said, well, I'm going to want to promote eventually. I might as well put my name in the hat and get some experience interviewing.
Exactly.
And the joke was on me because I got the promotion. And, well, it's kind of shocking to everybody, including me.
As I recall those early days, we were fond of, meaning Willimantic was fond of hiring retired firefighters. I think Walsh came out of New York. As I recall.
Walsh came out of Hartford.
Hartford.
Yeah.
His predecessor came out of New York.
Monzillo had come out of New York.
Right?
Yeah.
So we were.
But Palmer had promoted up within the ranks.
Right.
He had come here after Vietnam.
Right, but for a long time, for at least 2 in a row, we pulled in the retired because, as I recall, the logic was there. They had their retirement, so the Willamette didn't have to pay them as much in salary.
Yes, yeah. Well, and so I took the deputy chief job, jumping over captain, which obviously caused some hard feelings with some folks. And I just decided the heck with it. I was going to do it, and I was up to the challenge, and took the promotion in 2007. And then Palmer Senior had retired 2010, I think it was, because of health reasons, and I didn't have any designs on being chief. But Don Muir had pulled me aside and said, well, either you can be chief or you can go work somewhere else because we're not filling the deputy job. And so I took the chief promotion after being interim chief for 2 years, kind of just filling the job. And, there was some tough times there. We were going through some really difficult budget years. And,
Yes.
Here's this young upstart jumping over people at the firehouse and getting promoted and hard feelings there. And so we had some rough years. But, I think in hindsight, looking back, of course, everything worked out just fine. And we did some great things while there.
Mark, what are some, listen, I know your credentials are impeccable, over the years. In whether you're young and you skipped over, whatever the case happened to be, the politics of that. But the reality of it was that you committed yourself to fire service and the education of. That's what I always respected you for. What are some of when you became deputy chief and then you were in for 2 years, what are the things that you can, as you sit in the rocking chair now and look back and say, what are some of the major changes you did locally and then within fire service generally?
I mean, it's hard to pick one or two things. I mean, everything changed in those years. If you walk into the firehouse today, you'll look up on the wall and there's TV screens with maps, electronic maps, and the vehicles are GPSed and they're the calls. There's geofences around the firehouse and around the scene. The numbers, the data. The response times are all automatically captured by the computer. The fire engines and the ladder trucks are state of the art. Everything in that changed in my tenure, and not because of me. I mean, I happened to be the guy that was fortunate enough to lead the charge, but I couldn't have done it by myself. I had a whole
but you certainly
crew behind me.
embraced technology and the data.
And
I could see some older guys who wouldn't, to be quite honest with you.
And there was resistance originally.
Sure,
I always had this idea of like, well, we're going to try something. And if it doesn't work, we can always push the reset button. And so, we tried it. We had a lot of failures before we got to a win. We had these old tough book computers that like the cops had used in their car, and it was a complete fail. We had computer software programs that just didn't do what we wanted them to do. Everything is put in the computer. Everything is logged. There's reports for everything. And we had, it was pretty clunky there for a while. And then we pushed a reset button and tried something else. And, we had I inherited this old terrible server in my office that, I lost sleep over whether that thing was going to burn up in my closet. And we migrated to the cloud and, but initially there was some steps in between that didn't work out. And, there was a lot of starts and returns, to the starting line along the way. But, that's how you figure things out. And,
So what happened to the old call boxes?
Well, there's a story there, like there is with everything. And in the firehouse, I'm going to get there, just bear with me.
Take your time.
When you come on and you're sent to recruit school at Windsor Locks for now 14 weeks, and you come out of fire school and you get put on the line, and it takes you your first year to get to a point where you're a fully functional firefighter, and you start to think you know some things, and then so your training curve is really, really steep, and then it levels off at some point, and you learn for the rest of your career, but you start to have a little more discretionary time. Your nose isn't in a book, so to speak, learning as much. So they start offering new folks ancillary responsibilities, starting them with simple things and working their way to more complex. And if you do them, then you do them well, then you get more responsibility offered to you. And nobody has to take them. Some folks never do, and some folks embrace them. So one of the ancillary responsibilities in the firehouse at that time was fire alarm. They still have a fire alarm division. They have completely different responsibilities now. And their job was to maintain those call boxes. And, for whatever reason, those folks didn't get it done. The call boxes were falling into disrepair. And it was an eyesore from a optical sense. Like, the call boxes were peeling paint and just looked bad. They were still functional, but they looked bad. And frankly, the data was that the call boxes were being used for false alarms, and that was it. And, there was a great argument to be made that should the cell phone technology fail, that would be a great fallback. It was a couple $1,000 a year to maintain them, but it fell to the wholesale cuts that were going on in those years. It was just, those budget years, they were like asking me, do you still need $50 in that line item, or can you take 25? So everything, all the sinews were cut off the bone at that point, and the call boxes were one of those casualties. Most communities have removed them now. Deeply emotionally connected to those, the firefighters are, and it was really upsetting to the firefighters because that had been around for 100 years,
right.
And we always say in the fire service, we hate the way things are, but we hate change. So, it was some hard feelings when those came
So you do
out.
have some of the boxes. Do you have an old box in your house now?
I don't. No, I never bought one. No, it became a problem when they wanted to sell them, and they wanted to do it in a way that didn't offer any favor to town employees, because no town employee should get favor over a taxpayer. And I felt like I just didn't want to get involved in trying to get one. It wasn't worth the hassle.
The other thing I missed was, and it was amazing when I first came to town, because I hadn't experienced this, and
There was still horse and buggies out
that's
there.
right. That's right. We still had Dalmatians pulling the wagons. But I immigrated from Lynn, Mass. to St. Louis, and then to Princeton, and then I came here. And one of the things, one of my first
Couldn't
weeks
afford
here,
the train out.
yeah, one of my first weeks here, that wonderful horn went off at like at 2 a.m. I thought we were under attack. I had no clue what was going on, I see that seems to, except for the noontime horn, that has faded away. You don't do those calls anymore.
The horn's still in service.
Yeah.
They don't ring it, I think, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.
Is that what it is?
If there's
Okay.
a fire that requires multiple alarms, they won't ring it, just out of
Now the
courtesy.
idea is the horn calls in the off-duty.
Yeah, so back in the day, the call boxes each had a unique number assigned to them. And so you had a chart with all the locations of the call boxes in town. And if there was a second alarm, third alarm,
Yep.
they'd ring out that number on the horn. This is prior to cell phones, prior to pagers, prior to anything other than good old-fashioned landlines.
Right.
And so you're out mowing your lawn, you live in Wilmette, you're a firefighter, you hear the horn, you're counting it, and then you're running in the house and looking at the chart, and it was so now they just ring like 999 or 666 or 333. I don't know. I think it's 4 threes is what they
Okay.
do now. And frankly, fire prevention in town has been pretty stellar over the years. Code enforcement, housing code enforcement, building code enforcement, all of those things have come together to really reduce the amount of fires that we've had. I think the last one probably was just before I left over on Cameo Drive. We had a apartment building fire over there. So that would have been maybe January.
Hey, you're listening to Windham Weekly again with Ken Follin and Marc Doyle, and our guest, Chief Scrivener, retired. Mark, how is the recruitment when you left? How is the level of recruitment?
Well, there's a great topic because things, like everything in the fire service, completely changed during my tenure. When I applied for a job, there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applicants. They'd go up to the high school like I did and take the exam, usually multiple waves of exams because there wasn't enough space. Lots of people wanted to be a firefighter. Over the course of my career, for one reason or another, people just didn't want to work for government anymore, or maybe they didn't want to work for the fire service. The numbers dwindled really low, and there was almost no locals applying for jobs as firefighters. And we tried a bunch of different things. We joined a consortium of 13 towns from across the state to try to do recruitment together, and that stemmed the tide for a couple of years. And then those numbers dwindled again, and then the pandemic happened, and we had to really rethink everything. And I went to the HR director and I said, look, I know we do certain things a certain way because one reason or another, but I'd like to really turn this upside down and try something different, and make sure I don't violate any laws, please. And so I put word out. Well, first of all, we offered every firefighter a finder's fee. If you give us a name and we hire them and keep them for a year, we'll give you $1,500. And so all of a sudden, who knows better than guys who already work here, who might be a good hire. And all of a sudden, I'm getting a stream of names coming to me, and without trying, they were more local folks. The pool of candidates, without trying, was kind of more diverse, and a higher quality individual. And so as soon as I got the name, I'd reach out to him and say, hey, if you want to come down to Firehouse, I'll give you an hour of my time. And some people you never heard back from, and some people came. And so the first contact, I'd bring them in the station, I'd sit them down and I'd say, hey, look, here's the good, bad, and the ugly of being a firefighter in Wilmette. I want to help you figure out if this is for you. And I started calling it a quality over quantity approach to hiring, because the numbers were small, but we were finding some really great candidates. And then under Jim Rivers, we talked about hiring ahead of retirements, because typically what would happen is somebody put in their paperwork and leave or quit. And then, the Fire Academy only runs recruit school spring and fall because of the weather considerations. And so you might wait a little while before you hire somebody, and then you put them in recruit school, they go for 14 weeks, and then you might be better part of a year before that person really is useful, might be more, a year and a half before that person's useful in filling an open spot on the roster, causing the existing staff to be overworked. They're working mandatory overtime after mandatory overtime after mandatory overtime. We're killing these guys. Workers' comp injuries are going up because they're tired. And so under Jim Rivers, I said, I'd like to hire above my authorized level. You don't have to raise the minimum. Just allow me to hire ahead. If a guy puts it in writing that he's going to retire in a year, let's give him an exit bonus. Let's give him $1,000 or something, so that we'll incentivize him to put it in writing a year before he goes, and then we'll hire a spot.
Right.
And by the time he walks out the door, his replacement's ready to work, ready to be part of the roster. When I left, one of the young guys came to me and says, Chief, he says, I've actually had to pause improvements on my house. I'm not getting any overtime. We were down $100,000 from the year prior on overtime. Yeah, because we were hiring ahead. And I believe they're still continuing to thoughtfully do that. Things have gotten a little tighter with the budget since I left, but I think they're still thoughtfully doing that, and it makes sense. It's not wearing out the folks. They're not leaving as much because they can find a job to work less somewhere else.
That was my follow-up to that, was now that you've done that, and hopefully they're continuing that, because that's a smart idea. It's how most companies actually want it to happen. How is your retainment?
It appears to me that they're not leaving. The folks are staying because we're not beating them down.
Yeah.
And by the way, with the extra folks hired ahead, you throw them, put them on a shift after recruit school. There's an extra set of hands. Again, that's reducing the amount of wear and tear on the individuals. At the same time, we implemented some new technologies, and those technologies would have forced themselves on us anyways, like the stretcher that lifts the patient on its own. It has a motor on it.
Right.
And like the stretcher that loads into the ambulance.
I remember that when I was on the council. We had to get this. That was one of the first things we got. Was the power lift.
They're crazy expensive. But
they save the backs of a lot of fire.
They're cheaper than a workers' compensation claim on one guy.
Well, which sort of rotates into my next question. I think of the many changes that you've experienced over your career here in Willimantic, I think one of the bigger ones is you really become more of an ambulance service as opposed to fire service.
So 75% of the calls are ambulance related.
Because you were talking about the reduction of the fire. So how's that changed the work at the...
I mean, that's true across the country. Fire service has largely taken on emergency medical services in one form or another, and every fire department is seeing the same statistics.
Today was a busy day, I would assume, for the fire department, because as I was going back out to the Windhams by the apartment complex over there was a Mansfield rescue here.
Here's in Mansfield and Willimantic, back and forth all the time. Here's the problem now. So it's a good problem, right? People having fewer fires. That's great for the homeowner. That's great for saving lives and all that. it's also bad because the firefighters don't get that real world experience, and so we're sending less experienced firefighters to fires, and so it increases the training burden on those firefighters.
Mark, what is like work schedule, work week for an average firefighter? Do they work a couple days straight? They sleep overnight? It's 20.
So Willimantic's on a shift rotation that is becoming fairly uncommon. It was very common at one time. It's 2 10-hour days, 2 14-hour nights, 4 days off. It's over 8 weeks, it averages out to a 42-hour work week. Most fire departments have gone to a 24-hour schedule now, and there's a lot of good science behind why that has happened. The firefighters here just never really have come to a consensus as to whether they want that. I think they may make a push for that in the current contract negotiations. I don't know, because the young folks see their peers
do you still get the complaints about, I don't want to pay for the fireman while he's sleeping? I used to hear that I used to hear that when I was on the council.
I got to tell you, they're not getting a lot of sleep here.
No, I know, but
they had a banner day of like 29 calls in 24 hours or something. They're nipping at that 30 call.
And you guys also work with the paramedics out of the hospital as well. You coordinate that care.
Willimantic provides basic life support, EMT level service with ambulance transport, and then Windham Hospital provides paramedic level, which is a more advanced. And so there's a tiered system in place. For example, if you live in the Windhams, you call 911, you say, I have a medical emergency. The volunteer fire department would probably be the first to arrive with somebody coming from, your neighbor's house or whatever, starting first aid and basic life support. And then the ambulance arrives, and then the paramedic arrives, and then maybe they need, God forbid, Lifestar. So there's a tiered response to medical services. Right. And it all starts with a 911 call. The dispatcher asks you a series of questions trying to understand how serious your emergency is.
I'm going to ask you a question that, again, this show is not political at all.
Yeah.
But, so you can answer it any way you want, feel free. But where do you see the future of the Willimantic Fire Department and the three villages being volunteer in the next 10 years? I mean, they struggle to get volunteers, right?
Which is universal across the country.
I'm not.
Well, that's universal across everything.
Yeah.
Everything is hard to get volunteers. Youth coaches, teachers, it's all there.
What do you think about that? Where do you're a professional firefighter.
Yeah.
They're professional firefighters in their own right.
Yeah.
Just as trained. But what do you think it is for fire safety for the people who are out there at one point or another? I just would love to hear your perspective on that.
I'm going to choose my words carefully,
exactly,
so I don't upset anybody. But change comes on us whether we want it or not, and we can resist it or we can try to get ahead of it and have some say in how it goes. And I do think it's time for the folks in this town to get ahead of it and try to map out what the future looks like. And it probably will be a future of fewer volunteers. And hey, if we can find more volunteers, please join your local volunteer fire department. Mm-hmm. We'd love to hear from you. I mean, the fire departments would, but it's somebody still has to go to the calls, the 911 calls. We're struggling to find people to pay to be firefighters, let alone volunteer.
Right.
I suspect that changes are coming upon this town, and we're going to have to face some tough decisions.
Those daytime calls get harder and harder to place with volunteers.
And by the way, their call volume's way up in the Windhams. They're seeing record years as well for calls. Some of that's the nursing homes. Some of that is aging population.
That's Ken's out the Windhams. He's probably aged.
In North Windham's a commercial district that's very busy. And how many car accidents do you see out in front of Walmart all the time? Somebody's got to go to those.
Are you responding to those, or that's volunteers?
They send the ambulance out there, and then the North Windham and the other two departments respond together. Yeah. So I don't want to step on anybody's toes.
No,
it's definitely time to face some hard decisions, I think. And one thing is clear, that status quo is impossible. The world changes.
I agree with that. Yeah, it's always a difficult conversation about that issue, which no one's talking about. It came to my mind. I'm like, God, if you're having trouble recruiting, I know they're having trouble recruiting out there. and how long, and a lot of, what's the age breakdown between all the folks that I used to know who retired and just too damn old to be doing it. Like, I can't be doing that. I wouldn't be doing that anymore.
And it's hard to pay your bills today, right? With the jobs that are
Sure.
out there. People are working 2 jobs, their spouse is working 2 jobs, and there's not a lot of time left over to be volunteering, whether it's at the firehouse or at the Elks or whatever social organization you're part of. It's a challenge that the community and the society has to face.
Now, it's totally from left field. Did you get involved in when I was in college? I used to have a lot of fun. I would go to these weekend competitions with the old pumper trucks.
Yeah,
where it was 20 people on the
Muster.
bars, the musters, pumping away, and the 2 guys with the hose trying to get the water as far down the mat or the paper.
You know what? The only muster I ever went to, I think, was when I was stationed in England. We had a muster on base.
Really?
I still have the sweatshirt, believe it or not.
I have about probably a dozen ribbons from. We used to go to. Actually, I would go with one truck out of Marblehead, but then we'd end up pumping for other trucks that ran out of people just to pick up extra ribbons. It's a lot of fun.
Back in the 70s, maybe the volunteer fire department was going up 30, 40 calls a year, and they had to find ways to keep their members engaged and make it fun. And those musters were way more popular. It's hard to get them to turn out for calls now. So you just thinking it's hard to find people to do those kind of things. Plus, it's hard to justify taking $1 million fire truck out to do those kind of things too.
Well, these were the old the hand pumper trucks, the real old ones.
Okay.
Yeah, not because they're different. The real old ones with the hand pumpers was, like I say, 10 people on each side pumping away at the handle,
right?
As
The
opposed
antiques,
to almost like the fireman rodeos where they're climbing up ladders and spraying and it's a whole different ballpark.
Yeah, I'm probably a little too young for most of that. But
So the only other, just to segue from fire department, tell us about your life as the social butterfly of Willimantic there. For a while there, you and your lovely wife were, not for a while, but still, were stars of Facebook. And
I feel as if since retirement I've been working on trying to withdraw from
the social scene.
Well, too much visibility. I not to say what the future might look like, but I felt as fire chief the public wanted to see me being very visible in the community and involved, and I'm still involved. But I feel like I have to be careful not to eclipse anybody who's coming behind me. We're still here. I live a mile from here. We don't have any plans to leave. I work for a nonprofit here in the community, and you'll still see us probably a third Thursday, and we'll still be volunteering to pour beer or something at the Shabu stage.
Shabu stage, right?
Yeah. But I'm, of course, Facebook is everywhere. But I feel like I'm trying to just take a little break from being in the public's eye and enjoy just, I'm incognito with this beard that I'm wearing right now. And
That's why I didn't recognize him when he
That's
first
right.
walked through the door.
Yeah.
So he's allowing space for you to grow, Ken, in your public relations.
Listen, I am a regional celebrity at this point. I don't know if Marc knew that. I
No, I didn't know that.
Dopey Doyle over there, but
I didn't know that.
I'm a huge talent.
Which region are you with?
The Northeast, the entire Northeast.
It's been kind of cool because as a firefighter since 18, respirator certified, I have not been able to have anything other than a mustache, and I
That's true.
shaved that off a long time ago. And so that was probably one of the big things I was looking forward to about retiring was just not shaving. And boy, I have to say, people have feelings about beards,
They do.
and they don't hesitate to share them. But I walk by people now. If I am out in public, I walk by people who have known me fairly well and have no recognition of me at all. Once I start to talk, they recognize me. But,
Well, you're out of uniform as well. That's a big thing,
Right. So, my wife is being very tolerant of the beard, and maybe at some point, if I start to look like Duck Dynasty or something, she'll put her foot down. But she understands what it means to me right now, and she's being pretty patient.
Speaking of comments, Ken, what's the phone number in case somebody wants to call and talk to the chief?
456-1400. It's the hottest number in town, especially on Thursdays, 4 to 5 on Windham Weekly, with your host, Ken Folan, and my stumpy friend, Marc Doyle. Our guest tonight is Chief Scrivener, retired. Give him a call. Say hello. Ask him how he's doing. 456-1400. Mark, so you mentioned that you're working for a nonprofit. What exactly are you?
So I'm working for Horizons in South Windham. I being not in management, I don't feel as if I have permission to talk too much about the operations there. But everybody that has been around for any moment, more than a moment here in town, knows about Horizons in South Windham. So that's where I've been working since I left. And they're doing phenomenal work down there. So there's a website, you can Google it, you can see what they do, and big important part of our community.
Yep. Now, before you retired, I think the Windham Fire Department, the Willimantic Fire Department, was working with the high schools to try and help train future firemen. And
again,
you donated an ambulance to us.
Right. There's a scenario where we've had a lot of false starts and some success. The Windham High School tried to start an EMT program, and unfortunately the instructor passed away, and that just completely the program fell apart, and they struggled to find a replacement instructor. And honestly, today I don't know exactly where it's at, but in the meantime, Windham Tech is going gangbusters with their fire and emergency services program. They call it a protective services. They have a retired police officer from Glastonbury, Ken Keeney, who's an extraordinarily charismatic and dynamic individual, and he's the reason why the program works. They have more student interest than they have seats. They hired a second instructor to add capacity. They're killing it over there at Windham Tech with the protective services program, and so we started putting some effort into helping them. We had their students down the firehouse a whole bunch of times, put them in turnout gear, have them spray water, and we have Willimantic Fire Department has a history of hiring a lot of Windham Tech students. If you were to go look at the roster today, there's a bunch. I wasn't
aware they had a program like that.
It's a phenomenal program. Ken built it mid-flight, like it was just like midstream, mid-year. Here, you start your program. Here's an old disused classroom, and make it work. And he's just doing a great job up there. And every opportunity we had, we donated some old turnout gear or equipment or something to him, and offered him whatever support we could. And he still texts me now and then and shares successes with me. They're really doing a great job. And if you have a student going into high school who thinks that they want to get into this line of work, or police officer, I encourage you to take a look at Windham Tech as a possible high school for your student, because it might be a great fit for them. But it's competitive, and they have more interest in seats.
I'm sure.
And I really believe it's because of Ken's personality. The students just flock to him. He really inspires them greatly.
Right.
Yeah. A good teacher.
Yeah. A lot of it relates to the teacher. That's why, as you say, when Windham lost the teacher, the program falls. It's because it's tough to replace these people.
I think, if I remember right, Windham High School is partnering with the EMT program at ECSU now, and so some of the students, how some students can take early college credits. I think a select number of kids are going to ECSU's EMT program.
Yes, we've had a cooperative relationship with them for a number of years, and you're right. There are more and more kids at the high school doing the AP, the advanced classes, and actually graduating high school with a semester or even 2 semesters worth of college credit, saving their parents some money in tuition.
You asked about that ambulance, and that we donated to the high school,
right.
And they have a sharing agreement with Windham Tech now, so it's over at Windham Tech. They had some designs on the automotive department doing some work on it. I don't know where that is, but it's a shared asset. I think Windham Tech is going to be kind of maintaining it for them, and it's available to the high school to use.
Because it had been parked at the high school during the entire construction time,
and it got covered in pine needles, and it was looking kind of gross, and so it got towed or something over to the tech school for some work, and they're sharing it now, and so there's some sort of collaborative agreement there. But I think it's that makes sense, right, to have that shared agreement with the tech school, wherever you can find those efficiencies, for sure.
The program at the high school, I think, is remarkable. I think I shared with Marc through Messenger recently. There was a young lady who was recognized. She earned 60 college credits, so she got her associate's degree. She graduated from the college just prior to. She's graduating this year from the high school, but she just graduated with her associate's degree from
That's amazing.
You can then 2 more years and she's done, right?
But they had that special high school, the middle high school.
Middle high school, yeah.
Quinnebog Middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, amazing.
I think I saw that on social media.
I just
that's one
saw
of
that
ours.
myself. Is you got to have her on as a guest because it's again we're big, as you know, Mark, on supporting the public school district here, and
I vote for the budget, so
well,
Thank you, Mark.
favor.
Thank you, Mark.
in favor of the budget.
thank you.
As a taxpayer, I support that. So.
No, I just think it's an amazing program, and it bodes well to you as well with Windham Tech being right there and being able to do what they do to be a feeder for the Willimantic Fire
And let me
Department
tell
Police
you
Department.
how powerful it is for a high school student to graduate with an EMT certification. What are your options leaving high school for work? I mean, you could probably work in a fast food restaurant for minimum wage.
Right.
You could, I don't know what you can do out of high school for jobs, but you can go work as an EMT in Hartford, AMR or one of those ambulance companies, probably for $25 an hour walking in the door. Now, let me tell you a success story. I have a 32-year-old daughter, my oldest daughter, and she just got hired as an emergency room nurse at St. Fran, and she just graduated Capital Community College as an RN. And she started as an EMT. She put herself through EMT school with our volunteer fire department here, one of our departments. And she worked in a company out of Manchester, ASM, Ambulance Service Manchester. And she worked in a number of different locales for them. But she worked, I think we counted 6 or 8 years now. I think it's 8 years as an EMT. And then put herself through college to be an RN, and she's the only graduate out of 115-ish RNs through that program this year that got hired by the emergency room at St. Fran. They hired in other departments, but she was the only one. They knew her from being an EMT, taking patients into the ER. She was one of very few, 4 or 5, who got a residency in clinical hours in the ER, and the only one that got the job. She got this where she is because of having been an EMT.
Oh.
And so that EMT certification is super powerful. You can, and certainly here in Willimantic at the fire department, if we have 2 equal candidates in every other aspect, and one has EMT and one does not, we're probably hiring the EMT. So if you can find your way to EMT certification, if you want to get into the medical services or medical field or fire services, I mean, I'd highly recommend getting your EMT.
Sure.
So this is why we think it needs to be done in high school. By the way.
Sure. I
Speaking
disagree.
Speaking of your daughter, what is the future for females in the fire department?
Yeah, I mean, the future is bright. I think
How many do we have in Willimantic now?
So there's just one.
Just one right now?
Yeah, several have come and gone.
Right.
Yeah, but if you're a female and you want to be a firefighter, I'm sure Willimantic Fire Department would show you the way. And so, I think it's doable. It takes some effort and some work, but I think you can get it done. And fire departments are very interested in, having a workforce that represents their community. So I think they'll do everything they can to help you along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, besides now, let's put away the fire department for a little bit.
Yeah.
The military, we'll put that away for a little bit. What does a retired Marc Scrivener do besides working at the camp, which is fine?
Yeah.
Are you still biking, running, fishing?
So like any other new job, I feel as if the last 4 months has been kind of just focused on learning my new job. But I have not got the bicycle out yet this year. I kick myself for that all the time. I spend a lot of my spare time walking. That's, trying to maintain my health. I dabble a little bit in fishing. I have a grandson.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
Try to see him when I can. He's going to be 1 in September. I spend time with my lovely spouse.
Yes.
We spend an awful lot of time together. It's great. I haven't done any traveling at all this year. Maybe one time this year we'll get up to the Adirondacks or something. But, I've just been focused on learning my new job, really, since retirement. Thankfully, the fire chief has a generous pension that is very much a livable amount of money, but health insurance is an issue, and so I have to. At the current time, my wife does not get health insurance, and her employer. So I need to be the provider of that, and so my focus is on work. Hopefully, over some years, I'll find a way to to not have to work as much, but I'm still only 55 too, so I have a lot of work years left in me.
Wow, yeah.
See, Doyle? 55. Yeah. Where are you?
It's amazing. I'm 54.
Oh.
I'll be 56 next month.
I have years of experience. That's what it is.
And so, I mean, I wish there was an alternative for healthcare, but as there isn't. So it's too expensive to buy outright. And yeah. So
that's the downfall of many retirements is that health insurance. It really because it can suck every dollar out of your income.
What I will say is, since I've retired, I've been way more, because as a fire chief, I would try to be as active as possible, but I mean, you have to work at a desk, right? And so every opportunity I had to walk to town hall, I would certainly do that. And, I would take the inter-office mail, even though that really wasn't my responsibility, to town hall, just to have a reason to leave my desk, certainly go see what the guys were doing. But now that I'm not behind a desk anymore, I'm way more active. Like everybody, most people, I count my steps on my watch, and I'm doing twice as many a day.
Do you miss sliding down the pole?
I stopped doing that a while back. There's no reason.
No more pole work for you?
The fire chiefs to go down the pole.
So no more pole working for you.
Probably can make some money doing that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Somebody suggested when they closed the Cumberland Farms at Ashton Jackson that it might be a great place for such an employer. But if so, maybe I can get some part-time work over there. But,
you guys never produced a cookbook or a calendar.
Did you
miss the boat on
firefighters don't really look like they do in the movies. They come in all shapes and sizes, and they're not necessarily.
Marc wanted to be Mr. July and put on a fire outfit.
I was WYLI's Mr. July 2 years ago with my wife on the cover, not on the cover, on the July page.
Okay.
Because my wife and I had been photographed marching in the boombox parade, and
Correct.
we were in the July page for that 2 years ago. And that was very exciting for my wife. So.
You just see that a lot, though, not to get into that end of it, but I'm assuming those funds go to something to benefit the retired firemen or their spouses if something, God forbid, happens to their husband or wife who's a firefighter. They've got to do, because they sell a ton of magazines and they sell cookbooks and they do all kinds of stuff that you see it all the time.
Yeah, it's usually the bigger cities that do those kind of things, but
also part of the volunteer groups, I think, more than the professionals.
I haven't really seen that in a while, honestly, but I know you don't want to see me in a calendar, that's for sure.
You don't want to see Doyle in a calendar either.
What is the? I'm just curious. What's the lifespan of an average fire apparatus? The ambulances, because I know
fire trucks go 25 years.
25 years.
If you put them in reserve, you can get more out of them. You just park them and keep them in case. Ambulances, man, if you get more than 9 or 10 years out of them, you're really doing something.
Because they put a lot of miles on those things.
Massive amount of miles on them. So 10 years would be a long time for an ambulance.
Now, what's going on with the diesel versus the gas? Because I know there was a controversy about the trucks idling for a long time.
The diesel emission control stuff was killing us on the ambulances. And so the long story short is that you need to be over the road at highway speed for an extended period of time to burn off.
We might explain a little bit of that to the public. There was a certain problem with the emissions because of how long they idle.
Right. And so we're having an awful, it's called regen, we're having an awful lot of problems with those systems on the ambulances, and we converted entirely to gas.
Okay, hey, we are so excited to have had...
that hour goes quick.
Well, sure it does. When you have a great guest like
when you have great hosts.
Fire Chief Marc Scrivener, who we wish, as I always say to anyone who retires, even if they're young like Marc, we hope you have as many years to look forward as you do back, because you gave this community great service. You love this community. We're proud of you.
Thank you.
You brought professionalism, I think. Not that it wasn't professional before, but you added to it because I know you're, from what I can see from the outside looking in, you brought in education and really made that. I think it should be something that's stamped on the back of your coat. With all your years of knowledge of teaching firefighter service to these guys and the technology that you brought through, the budgets you fought through. We really appreciate your service to our community over all these years, Marc, and wish you well in the future. Listen, next week we have a super guest, Mr. Jay Hanfield. Jay, who was Remy's market, you might recall, great salesman at Oil Motors for many years in Gates. He's going to bring his history of Willimantic.
Yeah, we're going to show you postcards on the air
Postcards
next year.
on the air. We'll keep them up. Get to watch us on the YouTube there.
This will be like a Wayne Norman show.
So, I'll describe them. But anyway, so Jay Hanfield next week. We hope to hear from you next week on Windham Weekly with Ken and Mark. Thank you.